Bonjour, bonjour, mes amis. It's delightful to
Bonjour.
have you here with us this evening. Oh, so close. Words are going to be a struggle this evening. Hey, Justin, how are you?
Good to see you. I think you may need a little bit of magnesium in your life because that can help with cognitive function.
Touche, touche and topical. I love it. So if you can't tell by this beautiful little interplay between us two, this evening we're going to be talking all things magnesium. And I'm very, very excited to be talking about it, in part because I think Justin's such an expert when it comes to practical strategies as to how do we actually take what we've learned and apply it to what we're doing. And I think magnesium, simply doing, incorporating more magnesium in the diet, ensuring sufficiency, can be such a strong and powerful thing that we can be doing for our health overall, for our DNA, for all the things. Right, Justin?
Absolutely. It's one of these levers that we can pull daily. And I think that magnesium is a
Yeah.
particularly interesting nutrient because it's involved in so many different things, right? Everything from HPA
Hmm.
axis to how your heart functions to how your brain functions,
Yeah.
electrolyte balance. I mean, it's a big, long list. And the second reason why it's really important that we talk about it is because it's one of the easiest nutrients to
Hmm.
deplete in your
Yeah.
body. In
Yeah.
the first place, we have, nutrient deficient soil. Everybody knows that, particularly in the West. And we
Hmm.
also have a lot of stress in our lives. And stress is actually has a deleterious effect on magnesium levels. And
Hmm.
that can even be positive stresses, right? Like working
Yeah.
out. That's a good thing to do, but it will
Yeah.
deplete your magnesium storages.
Yeah.
Going in the sauna, that's a great thing to do, but you're depleting magnesium storages.
Yeah.
So we've got this requirement. It's difficult to get it through our diet, and magnesium depletes easier than a vitamin C or a vitamin E or something like that would. So all these factors together, it's a worthwhile discussion for us to have tonight.
Yeah, I love it. I like that you've mostly outlined what we're going to chat. So, for the audience that joining us, our goal is always to serve you. How we think this conversation is going to flow. We want to talk about why it's so important, why Justin was just able to list off almost every part of the body, every part of life, and how magnesium works its way into that, right? So, we want to talk about that. We want to talk about how it's going to be impacting your health and how even just small upticks and how much you're taking can prevent cardiovascular risks, anxiety risks, right? There's a lot of different things, even migraines and epilepsy, okay, seizures, all going to have impact there. Um, then we want to be talking through different sources. Where are you going to be getting it in your food? Do you need to consider supplementing? How much should you be getting? And then some practical strategies to ensure you're incorporating it into your diet. Yeah. And if you want to hear anything else from us, please do put it into the chat. We show up here every or most nights in order to serve you. So please do fill out that poll so we know why you're here. And if there's anything you want to learn from us, please do put it into the chat. I see Trudy's here, and I love that Trudy's already saying hello to my cats. For those that are frequent defenders on these webinars, you will definitely see my cats at least once more. They aim to annoy, and they're here every evening to that end. So, Justin, why don't we start into so it's often said about magnesium, it supports over 300 enzymes in the body. So let's get a little bit nerdy for a brief moment, and let's talk about that. So 300 enzymes, what is magnesium helping with? What is it doing in the body other than everything?
Yeah, other than everything would be exactly the quote there because 300 enzymes, I mean, enzymes do different functions, right? We talk about genes and genes encode enzymes, and enzymes really tell your cells how to behave,
Yeah.
right? So they're going to tell your liver to act like a liver, they're going to tell your neurons to act like neurons, and
Mhm.
they have these things called cofactors that actually help
Mhm.
them to facilitate their job. Each one has a different job, and they need cofactors in order to do that, right?
Mhm.
So, like for example, magnesium is an overarching nutrient because it actually helps with things called ATP ases, right? Ases is typically what enzymes are called. They're amylase and these different ases, lipase. So ATP ases would be the actual enzymes that facilitate the Krebs cycle so that your body can create ATP. We know
Mhm.
that your brain needs ATP, your muscles need ATP. That's the currency. That's what our body uses
Mhm.
to perform its functions. And magnesium is actually among those cofactors. So if you think about that for just a second, there's really nothing that magnesium isn't supporting here because it's actually supporting your body's ability to make ATP.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we talk about modern diets being so low in magnesium and it being so easy to
Hmm.
deplete, you're talking about a direct contributor to this energy crisis that we have. And I don't mean energy crisis as far as like fossil fuels. I mean our body's energy
Yeah.
crisis.
Yeah.
So magnesium is super important, and it's a pretty nuanced thing as well because there's a lot of different types of magnesium. Some of them will cross the blood-brain barrier easier than others. Some of them come in the form of these salts, right? So there's like glycinate and taurate. These are magnesium salts, and they have a little
Right.
bit more bioavailability than the kind of non-organic styles of magnesium, being oxide and sulfate and what have you. So it's a bit of an equation that needs to be unpacked, but
Yeah.
just know that about 50% at least of the population is considered deficient in magnesium. So that's something that we have to take into account here, and we need to replenish to the best of our
Yeah.
abilities.
Yeah, no. I like how you really said that magnesium is vital towards energy creation within the body. And that is one of the primary reasons we say it impacts so many different things. And to connect a few dots, especially for those folk that come to a lot of our webinars, every time we talk about mitochondria and how mitochondria contributes to energy, magnesium is one of the primary actors within the mitochondria. So if you're someone who's spending a lot of money on mitochondrial supplementation or your chronic illness and you're really struggling with it, magnesium in particular, given it's one of our cheaper supplements and cheaper to get through food, profoundly powerful to the end of energy. And outside of energy production, I want to think through different systems of the body. So Justin has mentioned already mental health, right? So magnesium attacks mental health in two different ways. Number one, it helps with a lot of blocking certain receptors in the brain that can create stress. So simply by having enough magnesium within the body, you're able to prevent some nervous system excitation that would result in stress or anxiety. So it blocks off certain stresses, right? Additional to that, one of magnesium's key roles, you hear a lot about it in sports medicine, sports science, because it's really important from a muscle perspective to help our muscles relax. And when you don't have relaxed muscles, that tends to be one of the first things people will see if they don't have sufficient magnesium. They'll kind of get like little tremors or twitches within their muscles, right? That means the muscle isn't able to relax. And how the body interprets that, how the brain interprets that, if you have really tense muscles, it translates that into anxiety, right? And so medicine, science, clinical trials have found simply by repleting or getting people enough magnesium, they're able to quell certain concerns of mental health, of anxiety, of stress, right? Yeah, Justin, do you want to talk a little bit through kind of more the muscular and the cardiovascular benefits? Because again, I think this is something people sit here and they're like, it's just a mineral. And I really want to emphasize how many different body systems and body conditions it impacts.
Yeah, and there's quite a bit to unpack within that because as far as what you were just saying as well,
Yeah.
glutamate is one of those things, those excitatory neurotransmitters. And if you guys happen to have caught the webinar I did with Dr. Sapp about dopamine, we talked about glutamate
Mm.
because dopamine, when it gets released, it's co-released with this excitatory neurotransmitter, glutamate. So it actually
Mhm.
activates the adrenaline pathway and it can have that sympathetic nervous system arousal. So I think that in and of itself translates to cardiovascular health because we know that the HPA axis and how that impacts the heart's
Mhm.
function, right? The more sympathetic dominant you are, you're more likely to have a worse HRV, for example. You may have arrhythmias and different things just as a direct result of magnesium deficiency as well. But that glutamate and those excitatory neurotransmitters, they need to be modulated or you're going to have anxiety. That's just the way that works.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I mean, listen, magnesium, it's got a really important role with electrolyte balance, and I think people speak of electrolytes a little bit too lighthearted.
Mhm.
Like it's just about
Yeah.
hydration. And
Yeah.
if you really zoom out on the functionality of the human body and you recognize that we are biochemical and we are also bacterial, but we're definitely electrical as well in nature. And I always
Yeah.
try to treat the body like it's a battery. That's why I talk about grounding. That's why we talk about red light and these different things that charge that battery up. Electrolytes are electrical, they are conductors of electricity. And the heart has a really important relationship with electricity. That's what heart rate variability is. It has
Mhm.
to do with the electrical conductivity happening there. If you're depleted in magnesium, you're deficient in one of the most important regulatory factors for
Yeah.
facilitating that in the cardiovascular
Yeah.
system. It's pretty likely that you're going to end up with arrhythmias and different issues with your
Mhm.
heart. So, like we have a whole cardiovascular section, of course, that we look at with the DNA 360. If you have
Mhm.
issues with your heart, pay attention to your magnesium levels because it's directly a contributor there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that you brought that up. And again, I kind of mentioned there's trials that demonstrate by putting a person up to sufficient magnesium levels, you can reduce anxiety. The same thing comes with heart issues. When you are sufficiently satisfied with magnesium, right? Especially those with heart failure, so a history of heart struggles, it reduced some of the stress and the strain in the heart by up to 22%. Right. For people with risk factors towards stroke, having sufficient magnesium can decrease that risk, I think, by about 7 to 10%, right? So we're not talking small numbers here, right? And I think this is also, again, if you're listening, we can also do a similar deep dive into insulin, meaning magnesium has incredible impact on blood sugar. Right. It also has incredible impact if you're kind of more sitting on that healthy side and you're trying to recover from sports or you're trying to recover from exertion. It's also really important there. It's important with inflammation. So when we talk about its importance, I think Dr. Varden and I, Justin, as well, we always talk about sleep is one of the best things. Magnesium's up there insofar as you do this one thing and it touches on so many different points within health, right? So, Justin, why don't you, especially given you have this beautiful storytelling ancestral awareness, why don't you talk a little bit about why the body is so, because from a design perspective, I don't know if I'd want to design a machine or a body to be so reliant on one thing. Why once upon a time was the body evolved, designed, adapted to rely so much on magnesium? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we're talking about these baseline ancestral mechanisms, understand that the body operates like a map almost, and it's a really complicated organism with so many moving parts to it. And like, I'll reference vitamin D here, for example, right? We know the
Mhm.
human species has always required vitamin D. And even now, practitioners, when they talk about vitamin D, they just talk about like the international units that you're supposed to supplement with, right? The IUs. What a lot of people still don't talk about is that magnesium is needed to sort of activate that vitamin D. And you can be taking it by the truckload and not having enough magnesium in your body, and you're still deficient in vitamin D. It's because of that activation. So
Mhm.
typically, I mean, in ancestral times, the soil had a heck of a lot more in there. And the food that they were consuming came right from the earth. Now, this is what's really interesting about our ancestors. Without microscopes, without all of these, things that we have modern day, they figured out different preparation practices that actually increased the bioavailability of magnesium in the food and other nutrients as well. So one of the cool things about this is that magnesium, there's a lot of it in a lot of these different plant foods, right? Like dark leafy greens. It's inside of the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll is what makes them nice and dark and green. However, a lot of these plants, be it legumes, be it nuts, seeds, grains, greens as well, they have things called phytates in there, right? A lot of people talk about these plant toxins now with the rise of the carnivore diet and different things.
Mm.
So, phytates, one of the things that they do is they inhibit the bioavailability of magnesium. So that's a problem. And our ancestors actually figured out that through germinating and sprouting and heating, you can actually activate phytase. Phytase is an enzyme that breaks down phytates, right? So if you break down the phytates, the phytic acid, it makes it so that they're no longer inhibiting the bioavailability of the magnesium and other nutrients as well. So our ancestors, I mean, even the ancient Egyptians knew how to ferment things. It's
Mhm.
really cool that they figured all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff out. And they
Yeah.
would heat and they would ferment and they would sprout and they would soak, and that would inhibit the phytates
Mhm.
because of the activation of the phytase enzyme. And
Yeah.
therefore, all of the food that they were eating, remember, they had all that time. They weren't in traffic and doing all this stuff. They were prioritizing their diet and figuring out how to get it the most optimal. So they
Hmm.
were doing all of these preparation methods, and it was increasing the bioavailability of the magnesium. Then they also had the soil wasn't compromised in the first place, right? So we
Yeah.
have a little bit more work to do modern day, and that's where supplementing and things does come in handy in 2025.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I want to drill this home, just leveraging my clinical experience. So for those that know a bit of the history of myself and my practice, for about 25 years, I was a veg head. And when you are plant-based in this space, you tend to get a lot of referrals in of people who either are plant-based or seeking to go, right? And in theory, a well designed plant-based diet should be sufficient, if not excessive, in magnesium. Because when we talk about our primary sources of magnesium from a diet perspective, we're thinking through our dark leafy greens, we're thinking through our grains, we're thinking through our nuts and our seeds, and all the other vegetable, and to a degree, fruit as well. So if it comes from the earth, if it comes from soil, in theory, it should be brimming and sufficient in magnesium. Now, I would see a lot of people who were eating a really good plant-based diet. They weren't carbitarians, they weren't junkatarians, they were true plant-based folk. And they would still show symptoms of occasionally magnesium deficiency. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit, how to detect, are you someone at risk for deficiency? But I would see them and they would be deficient. So these are people that theoretically have the diet that is primed towards having more than enough magnesium. And I would still have to put them on magnesium. Right? Two different factors are playing in here. Number one, as Justin has mentioned, if you're stressed, you're burning through your magnesium a lot quicker. And that tends to be the caricature of the average Western person. We're a little bit frazzled haired, stressed. Um, but separate to that, because of our farming practices and our soil practices and not allowing the soil enough time to replete its minerals, as well as some of the anti-nutrient food we consume. For example, I know Canadians call it pop. I think Americans call it soda or soda pop, something along those lines.
I
That
assumed we all called it the same thing. I think I call it pop.
No,
We don't?
no.
Yeah, I learned
Americans
something.
call it something else. If someone could put in the chat, if someone can translate from Canadian to American, if there's a French person, boisson gazeuse, it's like one of those fuzzy drinks, like a cola or a Coke or something. No, we have a word that Americans never understand. I just forget what it is. Soda. Thank you, John. Okay, so if you're drinking soda, soda is interesting insofar as because of phosphate and a few other chemicals within there. Thank you, Ruth Ann. I love when the translation comes to the rescue. There's several anti-nutrients that effectively stop you. Oh, it's pop in Pittsburgh. Love it. Okay, cultural ties here. um, Anti-nutrients within certain things that will actually inhibit. So outside of even just plants, there's a lot of processed foods that will stop the absorption of magnesium, right? And so I even say I by and large don't like being supplement forward, but vitamin D3 and magnesium tend to be one of the few supplements where when people come into my practice, I'm like, you're probably going to be on this forever unless you move somewhere rural and do your own farming, right? Because we can't be confident we're going to be getting it in our soil. So, Justin, I want to dive into, and you're really good at this lab science, so I want you to be the one to dive into the blood work of it. I want to start talking about how people can identify if they're deficient in magnesium. But before we do that, powers that be, can you pop up our webinar questions, s'il vous plaît? Ah, perfect. Um, okay. So the first question, so to our audience, we ask a lot of poll questions and we encourage you guys to chat with us because we want to know how we can best answer questions for you. We want to be here to serve you. So the first question we ask, what area of health would you like to most improve with magnesium? Um, and an overwhelming 40% want to better sleep. I love this answer. So let's keep that in mind, Justin, especially when we talk about strategies as to what form of magnesium and when and all the fun things in the why. I think the next most popular answer there is a mix between mental clarity and focus, and then lastly, inflammation reduction. So to the audience, thank you for answering that. We'll make sure we really speak to kind of the sleep and the mental and the brain of it all. The next question we asked is, how are you getting your magnesium? 60% say through food. Many of you, 86%, you're already on our brain space, you're supplementing. And then we have a few people that are doing topicals as well, which is a fun thing, I think, Justin, especially given your sports. You can probably speak a bit more to that one than I can. The last question we have here, do you currently take a magnesium supplement, with 72% saying regularly, 10% saying occasionally, and the balance saying no, or I don't know what to take. So hopefully, especially for those that are saying I don't know what to take, we can offer a little bit of clarity there. Yeah. Okay. So Justin, if people want to know, do they have enough magnesium? Would you suggest they get a blood test? Like, would you suggest it's laboratory work or more a clinical intake to help them understand if they're getting enough?
So this is where magnesium is a little bit, it's nuanced because a vitamin C or a vitamin E or something, it's a little bit easier to just test plasma levels.
Mm-hmm.
However, with magnesium, it's very important to note that like 60% of the body's magnesium is actually stored in the skeleton. It's
Mm-hmm.
stored in the bones, and the body and 30% of that gets kind of exchanged into the plasma. So
Mm-hmm.
you can check plasma levels. There's ways to do that, of course, and you can check interior of the red blood cells and get a little bit more of an actual reading, but it's still not going to be indicative of the entirety of your magnesium levels because most of it is being stored in the bones. And there's a certain point of depletion where your body senses it, and then it will actually take it from the bones, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's an exchange that takes place there.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really, unless you're likely really deficient, like clinical to the
Mm-hmm.
point where we need to talk about seizures and different things being a likelihood, then
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there may be some relevance of testing the plasma, in particular the red blood cells. But other than that, I mean, I don't think it's the greatest of indicators to test your plasma. If you test your urine, you're probably just going to be seeing what the body's excreting and not necessarily what's in the body,
Mm-hmm.
right? So to me, it's more of a clinical anecdotal kind of a symptom thing. Like, do you have chronic migraines, for example? That's a
Mm-hmm.
huge indicator that you're
Yeah.
likely low on magnesium. That's one of those moving parts. Do you have muscle cramps or muscle twitches, like Dr. K was talking
Mm-hmm.
about earlier? I think that it's a pretty safe assumption, though, that most of us are at least slightly deficient in magnesium. And remember, these levels will definitely differ day by day. If you did a workout and then you did a sauna and you're in a stressed place, like just cognitively, sleep deprivation also really
Mm-hmm.
depletes magnesium levels. Or if you just know that you don't have a heck of a lot in your diet either, then I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a pretty safe bet. And you may want to hedge that bet by adding in
Yeah.
some magnesium, be it a dietary source, right, or some supplementation. I'm like you, Dr. K. I'm not always like, I don't like to go right to supplements with most things. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about something that's tough to get and easy to burn through, you're probably better off with a little bit of supplementation in this case.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think too, there's also an element of, you can litmus test yourself, because magnesium is, to an extent, a relatively inexpensive supplement. I want to make sure I'm putting an asterisk beside that, because I want to come back. I have a little soapbox that I need to stand on when we come back to that asterisk. But it's a relatively inexpensive supplement, and something I encourage to a certain extent, of, because we've just kind of mentioned some really diffuse, non-specific things. Are you getting headaches or migraines? Are you getting muscle twitches? Do you feel tired? Like, this is very general things that are difficult to be like, sure, that's me, because it could be everyone. And so, because it is on the relatively inexpensive side, I tend to encourage people to do a little bit of a test. Bring a supplement in for a few weeks, see if it makes you feel better, if you sleep better, if you're kind of thinking a bit better, if you just feel a bit better, then it's probably of consequence to just an insufficiency of magnesium in diet. And statistically speaking, I think, Justin, to your point, approximately, if we look at just American numbers, and I would imagine this bubbles up to Canada as well, about 50 to 60% of the adult population is not getting enough magnesium, right? It's not in our food properly. And even most of the American population and Canadian population are not even eating in a way where they could get enough if it was sufficient within our food, because we're just straight up not eating vegetables and grains and other things that are so plentiful in it. Yeah.
Yeah, another aspect of this too, which is worth mentioning, especially because we were talking about soda pops, sodas or pops, is actually alcohol. Alcohol is
Hmm.
it will
Yeah.
increase urinary excretion of magnesium like
Mm.
2 to 3 fold, right? So if you're still drinking, I mean, that's absolutely up to you and you're an adult, but um, bear in mind, you're peeing out a lot more magnesium than you already would be, and you would be peeing out magnesium or sweating it out or whatever. But if you're drinking
Hmm.
alcohol, it increases that 2 to 3 fold. I mean, that's pretty significant, especially because a night of drinking usually involves 30 trips to the bathroom, right? Because you're
So
drinking
it's a
fluid.
natural diuretic. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
diuretic effect, right? So be aware of these things that we're doing maybe somewhat regularly to make it worse as well, right? Try to
Hmm.
avoid that. Maybe use some kava and some ketones and see if you can kind of substitute that, at least once a week, do something like that instead.
Oh, I love coffee and ketones. You're brilliant, Justin. I really enjoy that.
They're good.
Like, yeah. So from a level of how much should we be aiming, right? So we can kind of have two considerations. There's the recommended daily intake, and we'll speak to that. And then to an extent, there's the optimal intake. And there's a little bit again of self-experimentation to figure out where you sit on this spectrum. So, from a recommended daily intake for adults, adult females tend to sit around 300 to 350, whereas adult males tend to sit around 400. If you're a female who's pregnant, that number will usually bump up, I think, to just under 400. Okay. And that is the bare minimum. That is, if you're kind of just doing the very best to get by, that's how much you want. When we look at optimal health, Justin, where do you think those numbers really sit? If we're talking not about getting by, but actually thriving, how much magnesium do people typically need?
I usually add like a good 10 to 20% to what the RDA is. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think that the RDA is worthless. I wouldn't go so
Yeah,
far as to
I
say
agree.
the W word there, but what I do think is that it's not based on you, right? It's based on this
Mhm.
population genetics thing. And when you actually look on the back of like a supplement container, it's like RDA of vitamin C is this, and it's based on a 2,000 calorie diet quote. Um, when we're talking about magnesium, like I mentioned, because we burn through it easier than other
Yeah.
micronutrients, I think it's a safe thing that you should hedge your bet a little bit. And it's pretty easy to know if you went overboard as well, because you're
Yeah.
likely going to be in the bathroom shortly thereafter,
Yeah.
because it will increase intestinal peristalsis, right? So you
Hmm.
will, diarrhea is normally the first kind of sign that you've overdone it with a magnesium supplement. But
Hmm.
that's not a toxicity issue, right? Like it's safe
Hmm.
to push the boundaries just a little bit, especially if it's food derived magnesium. And I recommend when it comes to supplementing, and I know we'll get into that a little bit more here, I recommend a spaced dosing protocol, right? Because then
I
it's not
love
a
this.
shotgun blast where it's quite a bit all in one go, which is a little bit unnatural. You
Mm.
wouldn't get that in a meal, right? So I always try to tie supplementing with that general wisdom of would my body know what to do with this macro level of a micronutrient?
Hmm. Hmm. I love that. I love that. I like the idea of space dosing, a morning and an evening dose, or should you be so vigilant, maybe 3 times a day, dividing that dose.
Yeah.
Um, so let me pull out my soapbox a little bit because I think before, Justin, I want you to talk through different forms, but before that, I want to be very specific because you and I have both said while there's going to be exceptions, we'd have to see people clinically to say if you're an exception or not. By and large, most people need, even the plant-based who do it properly, who theoretically should be good, by and large, most people need a magnesium supplement just based on our food chain, etc. Now, I also said, they can be relatively inexpensive. Make sure if you're going to invest in all money that you're offering out is an investment, especially if it's something you're bringing into your body, make sure that you are getting a quality source of magnesium. Why do I say this? There is unfortunately within the supplement industry a lot of adulteration, right? The supplement industry knows how important magnesium is. They know how effective it is for a wide range of conditions, right? There are very few things I recommend to almost every person. Magnesium is one of them. And if I'm doing that, it means most other docs as well and healthcare providers are doing it as well. The supplement industry knows it's a big seller. It also means that it's more often to be compromised because people just want the cheap way around it. So when you're looking for a company that you're going to be buying your magnesium supplement from, find some third-party testing. Find someone who's done the diligence to say, it says this much magnesium per pill, per scoop, per whatever, and here's proof that it is actually there. Because when this would have been something we did a long time ago when we were a little bit more within the supplement industry. But we've done some third-party testing. We were shocked to find like a lot of magnesiums that would come off the shelf did not have as much magnesium as they claimed, right? And so if you're going to be doing a litmus test, or if you're going to be doing this to support your health, make sure there's a third party and make sure you're buying something of quality. Typically, that means not off of Amazon. Typically, that means from a quality, reputable supplement producer. Okay, that's my soapbox. Justin, do you want to talk through different forms? Because it's confusing. You go to a health food store, you go to a supplement store, there's a million forms. What forms are you talking about? Why do we care? Which are most appropriate for who?
Yeah, and it really can be dependent on what your goal is for the magnesium, right? And that's really wisdom for all supplements across the board. Typically, I mean, myself, I'll be transparent. I take like a combo supplement.
Mm.
I take the one from by Optimizers. They have one called Magnesium Breakthrough, and it's just
Mhm.
7 different types because each one impacts the system a little bit differently. They have different absorption rates and things. Like, for example, magnesium threonate is an interesting one because that's touted to actually cross the blood brain barrier, right? So that's important for all of the cognitive function that we talk about, where a magnesium oxide, it'll still have other benefits, but it's not going to do that same thing. So remember, there's different forms, and each different form does different things. So, glycinate, for example, is cool because it's attached to glycine, and
Mhm.
glycine is an amazing ingredient to help you sleep. I actually do collagen before bed because it's got some glycine in there, and it actually can help transition you into sleep. So that's why they say glycinate or a biglycinate is really good for that kind of dialing down of the nervous system and
Mhm.
helping you with things like anxiety, helping you with things like
Mhm.
sleep. Magnesium citrate is a good one for constipation. Actually, most magnesium forms, like I mentioned, could be used for constipation
Mhm.
if you do a decently sized dose. Magnesium malate is good for energy, right? So I mentioned that there's this ATP A's kind of
Mhm.
contributing factor to magnesium, and the malate is a pretty good one for that. The magnesium threonate, it's a tough one to spell. Threonate, that would be for the cognitive side of things, memory,
Mhm.
cognition. Taurate, which would be connected to taurine, right? So that's
Mhm.
good for things like the heart health, the blood pressure, preventing hopefully the arrhythmias and different things.
Mhm.
And you can use the sulfate as either oral, and that's actually used as an over the counter laxative, or that's typically the form that is in like magnesium salts of like Epsom salts that you would use in a bath. There's not a lot of actual research on that, believe it or not, as to the absorption of like
Mhm.
transdermal magnesium. But I will say, anecdotal, to quote Dr. K, my athlete stuff, um, I do think
Sport.
that it does help because it's going right into the muscles, right? So I'm
Mhm.
actually a pretty big fan of using Epsom salt baths. It's just
Mhm.
that the research of like how much does it actually boost magnesium levels, that's
Mhm.
anybody's guess. But
Yeah.
anecdotally, I've experienced it be better for soreness and things like that than other forms of magnesium.
Yeah. Do you ever are you partial to topical magnesiums like a spray of sorts? I know those are really popular within certain communities. Do you find benefit from them?
I've never used it. I've only ever
Okay.
used the Epsom salts as far as topical is concerned. But I will say, anecdotally, once again, I have patients that have sworn by that up and down and said that
Mhm.
it's very useful. Same
Yeah.
with like we've talked about GABA creams and different things. I
Mhm.
do think it's worth dabbling in these delivery mechanisms
Yeah.
instead of just supplement pill, supplement pill, supplement
Yeah.
pill. There's different ways that you can get into the human body.
Yeah, I've seen it, and again, this is an extreme population, so I don't know if this would translate well to the general population, but within some of my adjunctive cancer care work, I've seen people, when you're going through cancer, treatment, your whole body is disorganized and there's in general a lack of magnesium. And so topical application sometimes can be very, very helpful. And I see, and again, that extreme segment of a population, it be very, very helpful, but I'm not sure how that would translate. But I've heard at least athletes, sports folk, speak somewhat highly of it. Yeah. 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 All right, Justin, before we start transitioning into our questions and answers, um, I wonder if, do you want to give a few practical tips as to how people can be making the most of their food and extracting magnesium from it? Because you've talked a little bit about some ancient technologies of soaking and sprouting and all the fun things. So do you want to give, I want to give our folks at home some things that they can be taking back with them, they can shift in their day to day to really start getting the most from their foods, from their vegetable, their seeds, their nuts, whatever it might be.
Yeah, so I've always been a really big fan of those kinds of things as far as soaking and sprouting. And it's not just that it activates micronutrients, it also kills off anti-nutrients,
Mm.
right? So some people have difficulties digesting nuts and seeds and things like that
Mhm.
because of the presence of some of these anti-nutrients. So soaking, it actually downgrades those and upgrades the micronutrients within them. So that's a great strategy, and I recommend it, especially because once you soak it and it dries, you can just put it on the shelf and it's good forever. Not forever, but it's
Mm.
good for a long time, right? You can just have that in there. So definitely the when we talk about food, there's the food itself, but then there's the preparation method of the food, and I think it makes a big difference whether it's plant or animal. Magnesium isn't, there's not a ton of animal sources of it. There's certain fish, right, like mackerel and salmon. They're going to have some magnesium in there, and what's nice about that is that animal foods don't have to be changed, right? That's one of the things about the carnivore diet, is that if you're really sensitive to some of these plant compounds, they're not
Mhm.
present in animal foods. So you don't have to alter it. I mean, you cook it and you eat it. It's a normal thing. Yogurt is another animal source that has a little bit of magnesium in there, and that's great. But I mean, pumpkin seeds, chia seeds, hemp hearts, these are an
Mhm.
amazing addition into your diet. I've actually been dabbling in putting hemp seeds in my coffee in the morning. Uh, I
How's that
saw
going
Mark
for you?
Sisson do it. Yeah, blending it, you know what I mean? But I saw
Oh,
Mark Sisson do it, and he's like the guy who invented the primal blueprint. So, of course, I'm a big fan of his. These
cool.
little ways to just improve magnesium intake throughout the day. You can find a little source with each meal. If
Hmm.
you're going to make a salad, I mean, maybe add some pumpkin seeds into it. If you're going to have, something for dinner that's animal based, maybe have a little dessert that's got some yogurt. I mean, you can have a little bit of additional magnesium meal by meal, and then you're not going to have the bowel intolerance issue, and you're going to
Mhm.
just be upping the dose because we experience stress all throughout the day. And remember that
Yeah.
it's going to be depleting it all throughout the day. And so if you have a little bit with each meal, you're topping off your storages nicely. And hopefully that means you don't have to supplement the heck out of it either, just a little bit.
I'm laughing because you called coffee a meal, and I really value that in my soul.
It's part of my
Coffee.
nutrition strategy. So I
Yeah,
call
no,
it a meal.
coffee's my favorite meal of the day. I'm very plain about that. I only get one per day, and it's my favorite meal of the day. So
Yeah.
thank you, sir. I feel seen and I feel valued.
Yeah. Nah, ditto on that one.
All right. Um, and so I think I'm happy with that. I think I want to start shifting into some Q&A because I see so many questions and answers coming in. So for those that do have questions and answers, we'll probably keep the question and answer window open for about another 10-15 minutes. So if you have anything, please don't put it in the chat. It's a little bit difficult for us to keep up there. Please make sure that it goes into the actual question and answer section. All right. So Marion, I hope I'm saying that correctly, asked our first question. I think Justin, you've indirectly answered this, but I want to make sure you really re-emphasize it. She's asking, is there an issue with taking too much magnesium? Is there too much that you can be taking? Effectively, can you OD on magnesium? And if so, what does that mean?
Yes. So the big old word that I used was peristalsis, right? Intestinal peristalsis, where it kind of pulls water into the intestines. And so, yes, you can take too much magnesium, and that would manifest in the diarrhea realm of things. Like I mentioned, I mean, especially if it's food sourced, it's not going to be super toxic to the body. However, too much is too much, right? And that's the same with anything, including water, including air. You can take too much of anything. But that's where I recommend, first of all, doing it from dietary sources, and then secondly, getting your supplements a little bit smaller dosed, but then doing them multiple times throughout the day, because then it doesn't have that shotgun effect, like I mentioned. You're going to actually be able to absorb it better, and it doesn't have the GI discomfort that might come with too much magnesium. So, yes, there is such thing as too much, and you will be in the bathroom and you will know right away.
Yeah, kind of like vitamin C, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Autumn is asking a question. She's asking if she takes Creon, can you take magnesium at the same time? So for those that aren't aware, Creon is a prescription grade digestive enzyme. It's really meant to support or replace, I suppose, support and replace some pancreatic enzymes that help us digest everything. And so her question is, and this to a certain extent, because I know there's a lot of folk within our environment that consume digestive enzymes, maybe not prescription strength, but they do that. By and large, they don't really compete insofar as you can take both at the same time. There hasn't been formal study to say, like, let's study taking magnesium with it, but the mechanisms of action, the way that they're absorbed and act, they're actually to an extent synergistic. As opposed to competing. So they can be taken at the same time, but you still may want to check with your doctor, Autumn, because the reason you were prescribed the Creon may have some contraindication to why you're taking the magnesium. So always check with your doctor. But in theory, there's no competition between that or any other digestive enzyme. Okay. All right. Um, the next question here is from Kate. Does magnesium have any special effect on the liver in regards to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? Um, so for those that are aware, this is really looking at in the liver. By and large, there can kind of be, there's several things that can damage the liver, but this is kind of a sclerosis of sorts that can happen in the liver that's not associated with alcoholism. For the longest time, we thought kind of alcohol was the biggest offender, but we're starting to see this creep up. It tends to be really in concert with metabolic disorders, effectively bad diet, right? And so the question is, can it take any special effect? Um, I am not aware of it being a primary intervention, meaning if you're diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver, is a doctor going to very specifically say take magnesium as a primary, a main intervention? By and large, no. This said, I would offer it's probably going to be something that as a secondary intervention, i.e., something that can help, will be very important, right? Just think about everything that we've mentioned. It helps with blood pressure. It helps with insulin. It helps with muscles. It helps with DNA and cellular replication, right? Because it touches on so many systems indirectly, does a lack of magnesium create non-alcoholic? No. Does it contribute? Probably. And so it would also contribute to the solution. You definitely want to talk to your doctor because there's going to be different stages of that condition. And based on where you are, the advice might be a little bit different. But I think, especially for early stages, it's probably a great thing to be considering in conjunction with other things. Just check in with your doctor as well. And if your doctor doesn't feel comfortable talking about these sorts of supplementations, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can make sure we get you into the clinic and offer that sort of support that's a little bit more one-on-one. Okay. Sound good, Justin? Any other thoughts that you'd want to add there?
I would say that magnesium, in and of itself, is one of the better things for the liver. I mean, it's useful for it. It's just that
Mhm.
like specifically for fatty liver disease. I agree with everything Dr. K said, and I probably wouldn't push it beyond that. But just know that deficiency there, if you are deficient in magnesium, it's going to amplify any of these other conditions associated with toxicity and things. So make sure you have enough, definitely.
Yeah, I love that. All right, Kate, I hope that was helpful. Justin, this next question was written specifically and exclusively for you. Jackie is asking, she says, she or he, they say that they take magnesium L-threonate for brain health and memory. They're wondering what time of day they should be taking it. Um, and would can you also take in all one? They're also saying if you have kind of like um, a magnesium complex, somewhat like you have in the sense that it's not just one form of magnesium, but several forms of magnesium, would that kind of take care of other issues? I guess I would kind of read into that. Would that be sufficient magnesium threonate if your goal is brain and memory?
Yeah. So one of the things about magnesium threonate is that it's not something that you want to rely on independently for your total magnesium intake because it's not what's called an elemental form of magnesium. So it's specified to the cognitive function, and it's pretty much the only one we know of that does cross that blood-brain barrier. So it's very useful for that, but it's not going to top off all of your magnesium storages for the day. So for me, it's like if you want the cognitive health, you should have it as an inclusion. That's why I just do the complex because it covers so many different bases at once. As far as the time of day, I think you can take 3 and 8 pretty much any time of day unless you find that it has a stimulating effect. It's not a nervous system upregulator. Like it shouldn't cause like it's not going to have a direct nootropic effect. It's going to support cognition and memory, but it's not the same thing as taking, one of these nootropic blends or something like that. It's not a stimulant either, right? So I would recommend paying attention to your sleep numbers if you are going to take
Yeah.
it in the PM. For me personally, I've never found it to have a deleterious effect on that or wreck my REM or anything like that. But that doesn't mean it can't happen for you, right? Some people are
Mhm.
more or less sensitive to it. So try it in the AM, try it in the PM. But if it does mess with your sleep numbers, pull it on back to, no later than the evening.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. And I think it's such a beautiful support for the brain. There's a lot of research in traumatic brain injury and magnesium treonate insofar as it's one of the very supportive measures into brain recovery when something traumatic happens. So I think it's a great thing to be taking.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Um, uh, Usad, I hope I'm saying that right. Uh, so I think this kind of echoes the last question, Justin. I'll just allow you to answer it. They're asking, is it better to take a magnesium supplement that kind of has all of the different forms of magnesium within it? Yeah. And so your answer
Yeah.
is categorically yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because of the differences as far as the different forms, right? Like we're trying
Yeah.
to impact the entire body. And remember, when we're deficient in any of the above, it's going to impact the other systems that it's associated with. Right. So we want to make sure that we've got a spectrum and a blend because they all do different things. So taking one that has 7 different types, that's the hedge your bets thing that I was talking about earlier in the call. So by all means, and I pronounced your name Osaid.
Oh, thank you.
Because remember the show Lost, the guy's name was Saeed, and I thought that maybe that's how you said it.
Oh.
But please correct us in the comments if that's not how you say it.
Yeah. Yeah. Your name's important. All right, Shalini has our next question, and this is a little bit of a recap question, but I'll happily take it. How do you know your magnesium levels? My doctor only does the regular serum test. So what we've been saying is that it's really, really difficult from a laboratory perspective to actually gauge where your magnesium's at. 50 to 60% of your magnesium is going to be hanging out inside your bones. Um, about 30 to 40% is going to be hanging out in your muscles. And then the balance there, and this is a very small percentage, is actually going to be free within the blood. So typically serum samples where you're measuring that is really only going to tell you if you have a stark concerning deficiency. And by and large, you probably already presenting to your doctor for that. It's not going to be a blood test that all of a sudden discovers it for you. Clinically when we do it, so like, and again, most people aren't going to have access to this, but in scientific studies, that's kind of the clinical I'm speaking to right now. Sometimes they'll see researchers doing muscle biopsies to test and figure out magnesium levels in people. But again, that's kind of more research only. It's best to understand those magnesium levels through a clinical intake, right? So Justin just talked about various muscle experiences, various brain experiences. We can kind of, to an extent, extrapolate off of some measures of insulin and a few other things. Extrapolate, remember, not exactly direct. But I'd really encourage, if you think you're deficient, you need some support figuring out how to bring magnesium in, see a doctor. We're happy to support you here because magnesium is so vital to DNA into well-being. It's something we're very well read in, especially Justin, given kind of how he does so much work in um, diet and lifestyle means of support of a human. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I hope, Shalini, that caught everything. Um, okay. So the next question is coming from Nancy. She's asking, what is the best form of magnesium to take for heart failure? How do you know how much to take? So Nancy, I really, really encourage you to meet with someone, because if you're experiencing heart failure, you want to make sure you're doing proper magnesium supplementation. Nikita, sorry, I have a cat who's gone a little rogue. Um, but from a clinical trial perspective, when scientists looked at about 600 milligrams of supplemental magnesium, and different studies will offer different things. We're seeing bisglycinates. I think, Justin, you spoke to the taurine form, I believe, as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
taurine
also
form.
like there's a few moving parts to the ones that would impact the heart because anything that aids the HPA axis is going to help the
Hmm.
heart as a trickle down effect,
Hmm. Yep.
or anything that relaxes the blood vessels is going to do that as well, right? So there's
Yeah.
actually a few different forms that are going to have some level of impact on there.
Yeah.
I think that the glycinate and the biglycinate, I've always called it biglycinate, but maybe it's bisglycinate, I'm not sure,
I've heard
because of
all of the
the
above.
yeah, the nervous system effect of that, right? That's
Yeah.
also going to have an impact on the heart.
Yeah.
So I think there's actually a few forms that are worth
Yeah.
looking at, yeah, for aiding
Yeah.
that function.
But Nancy, I'll be very emphatic about this. You do need to talk with a doctor who knows your case history, etc. Because when you're talking about heart failure, so close. When you're talking about heart failure, um, you don't want to be messing with electrolytes without medical supervision. Okay, so Nancy, I'm going to say this again. Is it studied to be helpful? Yes, it has a profound impact, but that's always in the context of a doctor guiding it and a doctor monitoring it, because heart failure isn't really something that you get to play willy-nilly with. So be it us, be it your provider, please do speak to someone before you change anything. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Let's see. Barbara asked a question again around kind of serum magnesium, and I think we've spoken to that already, Barbara. Um, uh, All right, so this is a bit of a pontification question, but I love it. So, uh, uh, Mary, I apologize. I have no idea how to say your name.
We're
Justin, do you have a
so bad
guess?
with names. We
Yeah.
apologize.
Yeah, profusely. We're Canadian, so it's extra apologies. Why are so many people experiencing magnesium depletion worldwide? Um, what are some of the biggest health improvements you've seen when magnesium is added? And then I guess the last question is, what does the CFGP designation mean? So let's take this into two separate parts. Let's pontificate a little bit first. So Justin, would you like to pontificate as to why we're experiencing worldwide a magnesium depletion? And then if you have any clinical stories or clinical anecdotes of kind of a marked improvement you've seen when someone tries to shift their magnesium.
Yeah, so as far as the first kind of portion of this, I think it's twofold. I think A, we have less in our diet than we used to have, and then also less in the soil itself, right? So there's less intake, there's less actually coming in. Even if we're eating the right foods, the soil health of our planet matters so much for so many different things, one of which being the nutrition for humans, right? So it's a depletion in the soil, and then we're having less of the foods in general that have the actual magnesium content. And even when we have those foods, like let's say you have dark leafy greens, but you're blending them in a smoothie and you're not actually doing some of these preparation methods, like you're not cooking them, for example. Like I mentioned before, that phytic acid is there, those phytates, and it's inhibiting the bioavailability of the magnesium in the food because we're not taking the time to do those ancestral preparation methods. So there's the soil problem. There's the fact that we're eating a lot more processed foods and not as many actual from the earth foods. And then it's just not putting the time in for the actual preparation of those foods to get the most magnesium out of the food. Then the other side of it is just the stress. Like we've done whole webinars about stress. It comes in a lot of forms. The kicking on of the adrenal system, oxidative stress, all of these things together
Yeah.
are basically depleting us further of magnesium. So less intake and more excretion between those two things. I think that's what's causing it. I think in particularly in the West. And by the way, CFGP means Certified Functional Genomics Practitioner. That is what I do for a living.
He's so fancy. Yeah, and so Justin came into our folds and he's done significant amounts of our internal coursework separate to other healthcare provider coursework that he's done in certification there. So this is just something through our university and our training people can acquire. It really means that they've been through our curriculum and that they have some health designations and they're able to apply our genetic perspective, our genetic work to people's cases, to people's health. Yeah. So if you're interested in knowing a bit more about DNAU, the powers that be can put some information in the chat. Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. I think we got your question. Let's see. Just trying, there's a lot of questions I'm finding that are very specific to the form, and I feel like we've addressed them. So if I'm not speaking to your question directly, it's because it's already been addressed through other things. Um, Neil is asking a good question. They're asking what type of brands for magnesium do we recommend? So Justin, I know you've already put bio optimizers out there. Are there any other magnesiums that you really like?
That's the main one I use, but only because it does cover so many different aspects all at once.
Yeah.
Country by country, there's different, brands that are popular. And I look more at the milligrams and the types that are in there than how fancy the bottle looks.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that I've been on this one from Bioptimizers for a very long time. It has capsules as well as powder form. And
Mm-hmm.
lately, I've been doing it as a post sauna strategy, just to kind of
Mm.
I just think it's a good idea, especially if you do sauna in the evening. So that's the brand that I like, and I've been on it, and I swear up and down by it. What about you? You got some sort of brand that you're into?
I do. It's a Canadian brand, and my brain is blanking a little bit. So, um, I'll have to let me come back to that, Neil. I promise I'll recommend mine. I really like it. It's a bisglycinate. I'll be honest. It's not as comprehensive as what Justin is talking about. Um, so Mare, you have Camprev in there by and large. Yeah, it's not one of my go-to recommendations for magnesium. I think there's sometimes there's a program called Trax, or it's a company that really supports quality magnesium amongst a few other minerals. TRACC, I think there's two C's. And often if you see that on a label, it means it's been validated, it's a quality source. So that can also be something that is not a brand insofar as you'll see it be a biooptimizer or a CanPrev, whatever it might be, but instead you'll see that on the back in the ingredient. So that sometimes can be very helpful as well. Okay. Okay. The next question that we have here, um, yeah, May's asking just some supplement strategy. Can you take magnesium from two different brands? Yeah, I think really just being mindful of what Justin's already said about how much at the same time, because you can get a little bit of GI distress. Yeah.
Yeah, and doing the biglycinate, that one, if you're going to do it separately from other forms of it, then I would actually recommend doing that one in the PM, just because it helps with that parasympathetic nervous system activation, and it can really help with the sleep component. So if you're going to do that, then it's a good idea to separate it a little bit, and there's nothing wrong with taking more than one brand, so long as you don't exceed your threshold, and you'll know right away, like I mentioned, if you did that.
Mhm. All right. Mariana has another question for us, Justin. You might be able to speak to this because I know you're very passionate about electrolyte supplementation. How is an electrolyte supplement such as LMNT which says, I think per sachet, it has about 60 milligrams of magnesium. Is that better absorbed? And the comment here is, this person saying that sometimes not all magnesium is absorbed. And so they really want to ensure that they're optimally supplementing. And is it better in the form of an electrolyte where it's, so for everyone's awareness, when we talk about electrolytes, it really means you're getting more than just magnesium. There's going to be some calcium, some sodium, some chloride, some other minerals within there that are helping with that balance, the electrolytes that Justin has talked about.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of value as well because it has those other cofactors in there, an element, right? So it's got the sodium and things as well, which typically that's another one that we deplete pretty frequently. I mean, anytime that you have a cup of coffee, you're depleting your sodium. That's why I put sodium in my coffee, right? I actually put Redmond real salt right into my coffee. As to the absorption rate, I don't think that there's anything wrong with Element and how they formulate that. I haven't heard any kind of research as to why it would be problematic. But I will say that if you've got that 60 milligrams, that in and of itself is not going to be enough, right? Like we talked about how the RDA and things, I mean, you're talking 400 milligrams daily. So I think it's a great addition. And I think that especially, surrounding a workout or something where you're going to be depleting the magnesium, Element is good because it's going to have all those different forms of electrolytes. It doesn't have the complex minerals, but it's got some of those basics that get depleted regularly, magnesium being among them. So I'm a fan. I think Element is great. There's nothing wrong with that. Do you have an opinion on that, Dr. K?
I think you captured it perfectly.
Yeah, go ahead, use Element. There's nothing wrong with it.
Hmm. Okay, I have a very, very neat question coming in from Ella. Perfect. So Ella has offered to us a beautiful instance of why it's so, so, so important to talk with a provider before you bring on any new supplement. So we, by and large, throughout this whole webinar, have been saying, yeah, anyone can go do it. You probably want to check with your provider, but and Ella is this beautiful example of why you want to check with your provider. So through various workups, and I don't know the story as to how Ella got to the point where she was seeing her doctor for this. She was tested for an autoimmune condition called Lambert-Eaton, or I think it's shortened to LEMS. And this is a condition that so we've been talking about a lot with magnesium, kind of balancing calcium as an electrolyte, and it's kind of supporting with a lot of heart function. It helps the muscles relax, etc. And so in this condition, it's an autoimmune condition that tends to attack some voltage gated calcium channels, which without getting too deep into the biology of it is really important for certain heart and brain and other functions, right? And so because these are depleted, this is actually a very specific instance of where magnesium supplementation and magnesium excess within diet is not recommended. Okay, because it will actually go in, because you're not getting that proper calcium exchange, it will go in and further exacerbate or create more muscle weakness amongst some other highlights of the condition. Okay, so again, Ella, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing this FYI, because plainly I would have had to dig really far back to a lot of my autoimmune coursework to have pulled this up on my own. But I think it's a beautiful example of even the most generally recommended supplement of magnesium, we've kind of made this case of we almost recommend it to everyone, is not necessarily appropriate. And so it's really, really important to always be working with a provider as well as listening to your body. So for example, I can imagine if Ella took a dose, she probably wouldn't feel great afterwards. And listening to that as opposed to powering through and being like, oh, I just have to suck it up. I'm sure it's fine. So Ella, thank you so, so very, very much. I really appreciate you for bringing that forward because we all learn together. And I think I'm a huge fan of saying your care team should be a bunch of people, a bunch of doctors, a bunch of healthcare providers, and a computer, because between that group, then they'll know everything. So thank you for being part of our group and for collaborating there. Yeah. All right, Justin, I think we have another question for you. Um, you said to take magnesium with vitamin D. Would you say to take it with a multi-magnesium or a specific?
I would do it with the multi magnesium because vitamin D impacts every cell in the body, and magnesium, in its various forms, impacts every cell in the body. So there's not really a specific form that's going to translate to the activation of that vitamin D. It's when we have low levels of magnesium and we're in that state of depletion that vitamin D cannot be activated and released into the receptor, et cetera. So I would definitely use all of them. You know, it's pretty much my recommendation across the board here is to use all of the different types that we've talked about, because there's so much activity that it does. Um, Magnesium is so complex, like we talked about at the very beginning, 300 plus enzyme reactions depend on it
Mhm.
directly. So definitely get all the different forms in there. And you don't necessarily have to take it at the same time as vitamin D, but we want a certain baseline present of magnesium, or the vitamin D won't be able to do its job.
Mhm. I would also poke into there. I think this is also a real good advertisement as well for just trace minerals, right? When we think about how do we leverage vitamin D, I think in particular for males, to a lesser degree females, boron and a few other trace minerals are really, really important to the utilization of vitamin D for various mechanisms within the body. So I think one of the and I'm glad this question was asked. I'm glad my mind was primed in this way. I think sometimes we can become very reductionistic and think only to magnesium and forget kind of all the other cofactors. So, for example, at the top of the conversation, I said, Justin, you were talking about how important magnesium is for energy production, and I connected that to the mitochondria. And if we're simply to go back to that, right, the mitochondria requires a lot of trace minerals in order to do that function. So remember that when you're thinking through how do I support myself with magnesium, you also want to be thinking about all the happy little trace minerals, be that through a supplement or be that through diet, which often can be plant-based or to a certain extent, I think for minerals, organ-based from our animal friends. Yeah, yeah. Any other thoughts there, Justin, before we move on to the next one?
No, I think you nailed that one. That was perfect.
Thanks. All right. Sandy's asking a question here, and I can give at least an academic answer. I'm not sure I can give a practical answer. So, Justin, you let me know if you've played around with this. Um, Most of the audience will know Justin and I will like all the supplements that we talk about, we've usually tried ourselves. We speak from experience. Um, so, Sandy's asking, have you used magnesium bicarbonate, and what do you think about it? So magnesium bicarb, I think typically comes in drink form, and it's touted more. The bicarb is alkaline, and people tend to get really excited about alkaline things. And it's touted as more absorbable and really supportive of neurologic function. I think academically that's there. I haven't personally looked into the research around it, so I can't speak to is this substantiated in clinical trials, but I know that it's really popular right now. And I think outside of maybe cost, I don't think there's a drawback to it because I think it's a little bit gentler on GI from what I understand. Justin, have you played with it before?
Yeah, and I do have a couple opinions on it. I mean, in the first place,
Beautiful.
when it comes to this idea of alkalizing things, I do think that there's a benefit as far as supplement absorption, depending on the supplement, because stomach acid can certainly neutralize certain supplements. Where I'm wary of anything that alkalizes the body or the GI tract is surrounding a protein heavy meal, where we typically
Mm,
would actually do the opposite, right? Like
yeah.
we normally would up hydrochloric acid levels, not lower them. So I have like a list of supplements that I take away from my
Mm,
protein meals because I will take it alongside a sodium bicarbonate, and I'll do that on purpose to help kind of buffer the acid a little bit. For example, peptides, right? Like some of those, if I'm going to use an orally available peptide, I might take it alongside some bicarbonate of some kind to
mm,
help with the absorption. But if I'm about to eat and have my giganticus breakfast, I'm not going to kill the stomach acid. I'm going to increase it with something else. So I
mhm,
think timing of a magnesium bicarbonate, you might be
mhm,
better off doing that one away from meals or maybe even in the evening, because this whole acid alkaline balance thing, there's a bit of a circadian rhythm to it. And the body is meant to be a little more acidic in the morning and throughout the day, and a little more alkaline in the evening. So if you
mm,
are going to play with that, maybe try it as more of an evening strategy than a morning strategy, and
mm.
don't do it surrounding a protein heavy meal because you'll inhibit protein absorption if you kill acid.
Brilliant.
That's top of
I
my
love
head.
that. Sorry?
The top of my head, that one.
Boy, it's brilliant, the top of your head. I love it. Okay. Um, Shalini has our next question. She's asking, or they're asking, can magnesium help with high blood pressure? Can deficiency cause hypertension? Yes. So again, I'd really encourage you go to a doctor and have the cause of your high blood pressure understood, because can magnesium, is it often a contributor and often a cause? It can be. Is it the exclusive? Absolutely not. So you want to make sure you're properly worked up, because you never want to be in a case where you're running around with unchecked hypertension. This said, magnesium's a pretty reliable intervention when it comes to that for several different reasons that we've outlined this evening. So one, it has a lot of impact on cardiac function, right? This even goes back a little bit to what Ella was saying with kind of that, the autoimmune condition that they have, insofar as we need that happy little balance between calcium and magnesium, in the sense that one will tighten, one will relax. We need that happy balance. Without the magnesium, you're not getting some of that relaxation impact. It's really important to DNA and a lot of cell turnover. It's really important to muscles. The tighter your muscles are, the higher the blood pressure is going to be, the less the accommodation. And so there are some studies that look at magnesium as an intervention for high blood pressure. Rarely is it the sole intervention. A lot of that has to come through diet, exercise, stress relief, etc. But it tends to be part of um, that core first go at how do we address blood pressure, right? And so I would say, get the why behind your blood pressure checked out. And then I would really, assuming it's a reasonable why, tucking some magnesium in there is going to be really important. Yeah, Justin, any other thoughts for that one?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's one factor of many, to your
Hmm.
point, Dr. K, because nitric oxide needs to be considered and calcification rate of your cholesterol needs to be considered. Obviously, your genes need to be considered.
Hmm.
So there's a lot kind of moving within that because a lot of things can kink that hose up.
Hmm.
And by the way, getting your vitamin D right in relation to your magnesium as well as your K2, that's really important for anti-calcification within your blood vessels as well. And you got to think anytime that there's calcifying like plaque buildup going on, that hose is kinked that little bit more, that little bit more. And
Hmm.
this is a pressurized system. So the less volume is able to move through there, of course, the blood pressure is going to go up. So we need to find a way to get rid of that plaque, and we need to find a way to dilate those blood vessels properly. Have a look in your DNA 360 for a gene called NOS3 as well. Same with another one called ApoE. If you have poor nitric oxide and you have a 4 allele in that ApoE, you're going to be more likely to have that calcification as well. So again, I mean, magnesium, I think, could be a significant contributor there, and it helps to relax the blood vessels, and that's all great stuff. But there's probably a few moving parts to that, and if you're really struggling, a coaching program is likely in your interest.
Yeah, I think you touched on something interesting there, just simply like, what genes do you look at? And I forget where within the chat it was. I saw this peripherally within the chat. Someone asked the question of, I may have missed it, but did you talk about a gene that specifically discusses magnesium? Um, and we'd almost have to talk about every single gene. Maybe not every single, but close to it. I'd have to do a mental survey, but I would say if not all, probably close to 90% of our genes involve magnesium. And why is that? So before we even get to the point where we're talking about what enzyme the gene codes for, magnesium is really important in DNA replication, RNA leveraging, et cetera, et cetera. So first and foremost, you're not going to get any coding off your DNA without magnesium. But beyond that, magnesium, because it is a cofactor in more than 300 enzymes, when you do not have sufficient magnesium, many of these enzymes are just straight up not going to be working properly, right? So the mitochondria is kind of the most easy and convenient example here. We have genes that look in how clean do you keep your mitochondria, right? How attentive is your cleaning mechanisms to that, right? And magnesium is part of those cleaning mechanisms, right? When we dive into cardiovascular health, as Justin has done, right? Those with genetic profiles that put them at greater risk, okay, towards cardiovascular illness, right? Magnesium becomes all the more important, right? For those that are in sports medicine, right? There's so many different points. So we haven't directly called out a gene, but I promise based on your 360, based on where your susceptibilities and your suboptimalities are, magnesium's probably going to be part of the plan, you know? Ella's reminded us that it can't be categorically for everyone, but it is categorically for most people, right? And so it kind of ties into almost all of our genes, if not all. Yeah.
Very good point.
Yeah. Any other thoughts there? Are there any genes in particular that you think through when you think of magnesium?
I do look at like things like the stress response, like we talk
Mm-hmm.
about. I've already mentioned earlier in the call about the adrenaline pathway, and we've talked about stress and how
Mm-hmm.
it really does deplete magnesium levels. And we can actually point genetically to people that are more prone to that in the mood and behavior kind of executive function profiles. So I think that that's really of relevance. We have
Mm-hmm.
a brilliant vitamin D pathway as well, and just
Mm-hmm.
know that that cofactor is there and it matters. But I
Mm-hmm.
think you really touched on it because the whole body needs ATP, for example, and we know the
Yeah.
magnesium is a cofactor with that.
Yeah.
The whole methylation cycle, right? Like your body
Mm-hmm.
literally can't replicate, repair, transcribe DNA without magnesium. And here we are, most of us deficient in it, right?
Yeah.
So this is a really relevant thing, and we've got to find a way to replenish it. Definitely.
Yeah. Something like 60% of the North American population. That's so incredible to my brain to think
Yeah.
of. You look to the person beside you, chances are one of the two of you is deficient. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Ella is asking our last question of the evening, and it's a fun one. So, Justin, I'm going to toss it to you because I know that you try all this fun experimentation on yourself. Ella's question, she said, is already semi-answered, but it's a fun one. I don't have a bath, but they do use a sauna. I've been thinking about rubbing some magnesium into my scalp in the sauna. What do you reckon?
Ella, you are a biohacker and a pioneer, and I admire you for it. And we need people like you trying stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of this industry, isn't it? Like, what if I try this? Like, what if I try
Mm-hmm.
that? I'm guilty of doing that. I'm like,
Yeah,
oh, what
yeah.
if I combine this and this and this and all these protocols and stuff? It makes the whole thing a little bit of fun, honestly. I don't see a danger in you doing that. I mean, we're just talking about magnesium salts, and I have heard of people kind of spreading them on the skin.
Mhm.
So I don't think there's a problem with that. The only thing I would say is that if it's in your scalp and you start to sweat, it might trickle down into your eyes, and it is
Mhm.
something that would probably irritate them. So maybe be aware of that.
Mhm.
But by all means, on our next webinar, uh, roll up and tell us how that experiment went because that's a really interesting concept. And if it works, then I'll do it myself as well. You got my word.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, that's interesting to me because typically I'd think more topical application to like large muscle groups, so legs, calves, things of that nature. I'm curious how the scalp would receive that because there's not really much there's obviously a lot of muscle up there, but not in the same way as you'd see in like your quads or your hands. Yeah. All right. Um, I think that's that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other, do you have any Justinisms, any parting wisdoms for our audience before we bid them adieu for the evening?
Let me try and see if I have any like cool stuff to say. I normally have cool stuff to say.
Justinisms, it has a name for a reason.
No, no, I don't have any Justinisms tonight. Not about magnesium. It's just very important that we make sure that we're
Yeah.
managing our stress. And I think this is one of
Yeah.
those ways that we do that. I mean, we've had so many discussions about stress and how it amplifies medical conditions and how it's a really big part of the conversation modern day. We've got a lot of stress on us, folks. And I think that we need to find ways to downgrade that and manage it to the best of our ability. Magnesium is one of those movers, so definitely make
Mhm.
sure that you shore that up. This is one of those things, those levers that we can pull every day to make sure that our body and our physiology is functioning properly. So take your magnesium and get some good sleep. And we will be seeing you all shortly. And by the way, Dr. K, I love doing these with you. This is so much fun. Like
Likewise.
you're so reliable and you know how to make the conversation flow. So this has been an honor
Likewise.
for me from day one.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah. No, likewise. I think we make a really good team insofar as I sit up in the academic clouds thinking through all the crazy biochemistry, and you're like, girl, come back to earth. People need to know how to do this. And I learned so much from you in the how to do. I don't know if you know, I implement some of your health advice at home. So I am
Oh,
very,
good.
very, very grateful to you because I live up here, you live down here, and then we meet happily in the middle, and it makes magic.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
thank you to everybody for rolling up tonight. I love these things and we're going to
Yeah.
keep pumping them out. It's all for you. So keep
Yeah.
showing up.
Yeah, and to that end, if you have a suggestion, if you have something you want us to be talking through in a webinar, do not hesitate to reach out to us. We send out surveys after the fact so you can say, hey, loved this, didn't love this, or hey, can you do this in the future? This is quite literally all for you. So make sure that you let us know what you're looking for. Okay. On that note, I think it's time we bid everyone au revoir, adieu, à bientôt, all the other fun greetings. So have a wonderful evening or afternoon or morning, depending on where you're calling in from. Au revoir, mes amis.
Bye
Au
bye.
revoir.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Bye.